For American, it's a win. For TSMC, it's a rape.
This policy overall is a very damaging policy to the global AI chip-making industry.
I speak as a former engineer. A good engineer will always find their way around whatever obstacles are in front of them.
The Chat Lounge. Chat Lounge.
Chat Lounge.
The Chat Lounge unpacks views and opinions on hot issues in a more casual way.
Welcome to the Chat Lounge. I'm Qiang, and joining me to discuss whether the United States can regain its position in chip making are William Li, chief economist with the U.S.-based Milken Institute, Dr. Qiang, fellow of the Belt and Road Research Center at Minzu University of China, and Dr. Li Yun, assistant professor of economics at Peking University. It's a great pleasure to have you all back at the chat, gentlemen. So the United States is trying very hard to regain its dominance in chip making. There have been a series of news articles about chip production and sales in the U.S. recently. I think the most important stories may be about the mass production of 4-nanometer chips in Arizona and the new rules on chip export control. So we first look at the mass production of advanced chips. U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo has announced the world's biggest chip maker, TSMC, had begun mass production of 4-nanometer chips at its Arizona facility, hailing it as a milestone event for the country. So, William, let's begin with you. What's your evaluation?
I think this is quite an achievement. TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor, has always been the secret sauce of all of these very advanced chips, but they've only restricted their production of advanced chips to their Taiwan facilities. The fact that they actually were able to establish something abroad is a major accomplishment for them, because Taiwan Semiconductor, as a company, prides itself on a very unique management system that's very top-down. It has a corporate culture that's very unique. It has fended off every competitor possible in the world. The Singaporeans actually tried to establish some kind of presence in the chip-making sector, and they failed. So the fact that TSMC is now able to establish a second plant outside of Taiwan that seems to be well on the way to making some of the most advanced chips that they manufacture is an achievement in cross-cultural and international production that this company has not been able to do for some time.
To Dr. Shi, some people actually have doubts over the significance and how well the fab operates, and say the announcement of the mass production days before Biden leaves the White House is only aimed to highlight the Biden administration's political legacy. So what's your interpretation? Does that make any sense to you?
Well, I think, yes, Biden left the White House, and as a Democrat's legacy, I think TSMC actually will face, a lot of things post-Biden administration, especially when Trump get into the White House. There are many problems probably are not going to be easy to deal with. For example, everybody knows that TSMC right now faces many problems in America, like culture shock. You see, the Asian factory culture are not quite something that American workers, employees would like to see. It's very strict, and we've been seeing that many local hired employees, basically, they just quit it. So, which made that TSMC basically need to, move some of their local, Taiwan employees to America, relocate them. But here is the problem of the visa. And probably visa is one of the most important and sensitive topic in America recently. So this can be a very different problem, especially when Trump get into the office. So visa can be a problem for TSMC, as well as for the competition and whole compensation systems. So basically, TSMC can use a rather affordable and a very good deal kind of the salary and pay package to hire very high caliber talents in Asian market. But when it comes to America, America is not like China. Come on, you cannot just use such kind of a package to hire local top-notch talent. And also, TSMC moved to America from China. One of the most important reasons is that American government made a promise about the subsidies, basically about $6.6 billion US. And also, there are another extra $5 billion US loan interest rate loan for the wafer factories, for the chip factories. But now they only get like $5 billion US, but the rest of the money, more than another 0.5%, basically is nowhere. basically Biden is just counting days. And when Trump gets in, nobody knows what's going to happen. So this is huge uncertainty from the chief law and from the financial perspective, basically are making this thing harder. And also, you probably heard that American have AI anti-proliferation restrictions are happening. Well, I think most affected companies, Nvidia, for sure. TSMC, as a most important supplier for the chip making for Nvidia, will also get the collateral damage. So if Nvidia is going to lose China, mainland as the largest market, I think TSMC basically will suffer a lot as well. So moving to America, they have already taken one for the team, higher employee cost, higher land cost, and higher everything cost. And now you're telling them basically you're going to pay higher cost and then you can sell less product and you're going to have less income. How is it going to be? And you have to understand the chips business is actually a very, very intelligent, intensive, and a capital intensive industry. It means you have to roll in and invest in heavily on the research and development without extra money from the sales. How can you keep on improve your technology by research? So that's a problem.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about the outlook maybe later on. But for now, would you call it a milestone event then?
No, I wouldn't call it a milestone. I think even a monkey can do the same job. Yeah. Come on. If you give Brazil, if you give India, if you give, let's switch another topic, give Myanmar like 20 billion US dollar to ask TSMC to go there to set up a factory. Well, as long as they have power, have Wi-Fi, have stability in there, you can set up everything immediately over a month.
But TSMC actually chose the United States, right? It's a win for Washington.
Well, for American is a win. For TSMC is a rape because TSMC did not choose America, but America forced them and strong-armed them too there. So basically is a rape and with payment. It's not a choice. Do they have a choice? No. If they have a choice, they probably would move to China, mainland. Come on, larger team of engineers, very affordable cost, very safe and stable policy and environment, and lots of support from the government. What else? And also China itself is the largest chip market of the whole world. Everybody built a factory near the market.
Okay, then to Dr. Li, how would you evaluate the significance of the Fab 21 Phase 1 starting operation there in the States?
If the announcement is true, that's a big thing. Then I agree with him that it's actually a pretty big deal, and not just for TSMC, obviously, but also, and more importantly, for the US government. I'm going to talk about the implication and impact for China maybe later on in the program. But what it means actually is that after many years of planning, of coordination of construction, and after billions of dollars invested in this plant, the Arizona plant is finally delivering on its promise to actually manufacture these advanced chips that's intended to make. But that said, I do want to point out two observations that I think are very interesting.
Right.
First, the announcement of the 4 nanometer chip production came not from TSMC itself, but rather came from the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo. And Gina told Reuters that it's a win for the Biden administration's semiconductor policy. But when Reuters came to TSMC's spokesperson last Friday for comment, very interestingly, TSMC's spokesperson declined to comment. So that's the first observation that I want to make. And the second one is that while it looks very likely that at the current stage, the 4 nanometer chips are currently being made, how many of the chips are being made every month? What's the production plan for the rest of 2025? These are all remain unclear. So is this a rather like a first test run of a commercial production, or are we looking at like full-blown mass production? So I think it's probably somewhere in between, but how much, how close to each end, it's unclear. And how much capacity are we talking about for this Fab 21? And also the more important question is at what cost? Is it very costly to produce each chip, and at what sale prices are they selling to U.S. consumers? Right. So I think before we can fully grasp the significance of this announcement itself, those are the questions that we really need to answer before being able to fully understand.
Right, good questions. But according to some reports, the yield and quality of the chips produced at the fab are on par with those made in Taiwan, right? William, do you have any firsthand information on this that you can tell us more about it?
Actually, in preparing for the show, I actually looked up quite a bit of material that was published about the chip production. And you're absolutely right that the levels of production are very, very high. And in fact, the yield rivals and even exceeds some of the yields that were done in Taiwan. Now, I have to say, Dr. Lee expresses a lot of the questions I express as well, because chip production is not easy, as I said earlier. Singapore invested not just billions, but really years and years of effort to try to replicate what TSMC does and was not able to do it. So regardless of Dr. Chu's rhetoric about monkeys and Miramar being able to do this within hours with enough money, chip production is hard. And TSMC itself said that they were not sure whether they could adapt the Chinese management and technology production processes to American culture. And so these challenges were really quite severe. And the fact that they are even in test cases being able to make sufficient production to say we are on our way, that's really quite an achievement. And Dr. Lee also said, very correctly, that being a very capital intensive industry, the United States provided enormous subsidies to get TSMC going in the United States, overcoming enormous challenges of being located in Arizona, where if I were to relocate TSMC, I would not choose Arizona because it's a desert. And the one thing you know about chip production is that it's very water intensive. In fact, it strains the water facilities that they have in Taiwan. So there are challenges to locating it there. I'm not sure why the Biden administration chose that area, except that Arizona has become a locus of high-tech production. Not only do you have TSMC there, but you also have a lot of American factories there, including fabs by Intel, that do the same thing. So there's an attempt to try to put together a culture and an atmosphere and a workforce that's highly skilled and specialized in chip production. And I, quite frankly, am not sure whether they will eventually succeed or not. It is an experiment, and it comes about through an enormous amount of subsidy because United States policy considers it very important to have chip production located in the United States. And they're willing to pay the leaders in the industry to come here to do that. And TSMC sees the value of doing that because, quite frankly, as big as the China market is for TSMC, the bigger market is the West, and the United States being at the top of that bigger market. And TSMC, along with every other international company, chooses to produce their product near the consumer of that product. Toyota and the Japanese car makers, Korean car makers, German car makers have all employed the same production model of relocating the production closest to the end destination. And the United States is that end destination. So I think the judgment is out. I think Dr. Lee might be right in asking, did the Biden administration in its waning days try to claim a big victory before Trump comes in? And the Make America Great agenda, let's remember, is to maximize U.S. employment and high-paying jobs. And I'm sure that President Trump would not reverse the decisions made by the Biden administration. In fact, President Trump probably would finance the subsidies in a slightly different way, probably by the use of tariffs, in order to burden on the American citizen for subsidizing and allowing that chip production to take place in Arizona.
The Chat Lounge. The Chat Lounge unpacks views and opinions on hot issues in a more casual way.
Like William just mentioned, there were a lot of challenges, and I'm sure there are a lot of concessions have been made during this process because actually in July 2023, TSMC said it would delay opening the first Arizona chip factory due to various reasons, like you all mentioned, including shortage of technical workers with critical expertise and some licensing issues, and also, obviously, like Dr. Chu mentioned, the visa is a big problem there. But now it's operational as scheduled, and it shows how determined, if you will, the Biden administration was to make this happen as planned. And they also got this plan to open phase 2 in 2028, and it promises 3 nanometer class process technologies. And by the decade's end, TSMC expects to build Fab 21 Phase 3, which will produce chips on 2 nanometer and 1.6 nanometer class nodes. So going forward, Dr. Qi, what could be the major challenges you see in achieving those goals? Do you expect any interruption or delay in the future?
For this answer, I have two parts. Part one is yes, there is a possibility for sure. I mean, just to make it clear, making chips is never an easy thing, but to move a chip factory is not that difficult. And that is the lowest hanging fruit that you can achieve. So 4 nanometer, I think TSMC already got that capacity in their hand. So 4 nanometer, okay, but when you talk about 2 nanometer and 3 nanometer, I think most of the problem did not only come from the management, human resources. Well, I think they can still move the top-notch scientists and engineers from some other places globally, concentrate them in America, but still cannot solve the problems. Number one, 2 nanometer and 3 nanometer, it requires a lot of more money invested in there, and it's a long-term investment. Just to remember, when we got from the 14 nanometer to 7 nanometer to 4, basically there are like 3 to 5 years of at least the span for the research and development. And that's a problem here, is because, as I just mentioned, when they move to America, all the cost goes up, not only the research and the development, right? So this is a problem one. And also, secondly, it's what we're talking about is the cells. So when some other costs are eating away the cake, and then you're telling them the cake are smaller next year because you're blocking China, which is your largest client, out of the market, and you're probably going to fewer of your income from your major party A, like Nvidia. So they would not have so much money enough to, for the next round of the R&D. And also physically, from the physics theory, and we are hitting what we're called the energy war. And the heat problems and the energy efficiency problems are there. So basically, you're seeing that some companies are requiring that the Microsoft and some other chip makers are providing them back the old style structures of the chips, like the Hopper structure chip style, because that old chip basically consumes less of the energy, but delivers, still make the job done. So they have a better balance between the energy consumption, the heat sending, and also the capacity of the calculation. But the more and more these so-called more advanced chips, GPU and CPU, they will consume much more of the energy, exponentially more of the energy, more of the heat, needing some more exponential difficulties to solve the heating problems. And then the extra power of calculation actually are very little. So it's not very economic. So I think by physics, they are hitting some hard war in there. Mm-hmm. If they're going to cross the war and make a breakthrough, they need a longer term of certain environment, policy, finance, market expectation, and also the continuous stable investment in a very stable team of the scientists to come work on that project. But now I think for Arizona factory and their new operation in here, especially when Trump is going to get into the White House, I think there are many big question marks ahead of us. So
you're saying the chances are very low for them to
I think chances are low. Well, if it's not low, they're going to pay huge. They're going to bleed a lot to overcome that difficulties.
All right. Then Dr. Li and William, do you have any different opinion there?
Well, I think I agree mostly with what Professor Qi said, but I just like to add one small thing about another challenge that TSMC may face in for the phase 2 and phase 3 production, which is the market outlook for these advanced chips. So Professor Qi has already mentioned about the cost efficiency of using these more cutting edge technologies to train, for example, AI models. But because the production plan is to start production by the end of this decade, one challenge is that by then it may not be highly demanded for companies to use these cutting edge chips to train AI models. The reason I'm saying this is because we've seen, recent developments such as DeepSeek, a Chinese AI large language model, which uses basically last generation GPUs at a fraction of time and cost to train one of the almost equivalent AI models to ChatGPT. So in the future, it could be that the trend is going toward not using the fastest or the most powerful chip, but rather to use a cost-efficient or energy-efficient chip. So if that is the case, even though TSMC could be successfully selling these chips to Apple or to Nvidia, I mean, maybe the most of the consumers do not need the most advanced chips. So that challenge, I think, is for the long term for TSMC to worry about is the market outlook and market demand.
Quite interesting observation. And William?
Yeah, and we'd also want to remind everybody that chip making is an enormously cyclical industry. There are lean years and there are good years. So far, all this obsession with AI and chasing after the fastest chip has made Nvidia and along with it TSMC the darling of Wall Street in the sense that people have forgotten that it's cyclical. They just are willing to pay a higher and higher price because of this ever-expanding potential market. And like everything else, it has limits. So I tend to agree that the technological problems and the costs involved in solving the size reduction of these chips may be overwhelmed by other considerations. But regardless of what it produces, the most important aspect about producing in the United States is that they're producing in the United States. I think whether it's a 1.6 nanometer node or a 4 nanometer node, the objective for policy in the United States has been to secure our supply chain in a way that guarantees the availability of this kind of technology for use in the United States and in the West in general. And I think one of the things that the TSMC is going to have to do is it's a management issue as to where and what market you want to focus on. And they are also focusing on the Chinese market by producing the chips that are saleable there. And they're not ignoring that market. All of the people who sell in that market are coming to them for production because TSMC is the most efficient foundry. And let's not forget, they are a foundry. It's the designers of the chips end market for which they'll be used that determine what TSMC produces. So those are market forces that are yet to be seen, but the race toward the 0 nanometer chip or the most advanced possible is, I think, one metric which I think is not the most important metric.
Indeed, there are a lot of factors that may affect the progress or process of TSMC's plan in Arizona. But if the plan goes as it's expected, what would be the impact on TSMC itself then, William? Because
that's a great question.
A lot of analysts say it's on its way to becoming ASMC.
Actually, it's going to have to become ISMC, International Semiconductor, because as I said, the model that works best these days is to produce in your end market. The Europeans are also going to be an ultimate end market, as well as probably the countries in Latin America and the Middle East. And even though they are not yet on the horizon, their demand for advanced technology is growing very rapidly. And I think one of the things that Morris Chang has noted is that TSMC's success lies in its management style and the dedication of its workers. Meaning, I think you had an example. If a machine breaks down in Taiwan at 1 o'clock in the morning, it's fixed by 2 a.m. Whatever engineer is needed to wake up to come to it, they do that, and their wives just go back to sleep. And his question was, will American engineers show that kind of dedication and get up and come fix the machine? I think one of the things about international production is that management styles will have to change to adapt to their environment. You cannot expect global workers to have that kind of dedication. So one way to fix that, for example, would be put in more redundancy so that a failure in one part of the factory will not grind the factory to a halt, and that you can wait until tomorrow morning to fix the machine because you got to figure out why the machine broke. So I think the types of management styles that will be adapted by TSMC is their biggest management challenge. If they're going to be a global producer and locating around the world, they will have to change their management style and their engineering management style, their technology management style, in order to adapt to the needs of the different areas in which they produce. So I think that is the kind of flexibility that we need to see TSMC to show.
This has been the Chat Lounge. When we come back, we'll find out how the European Union and China, the two major markets for advanced chips, react. Stay with us.
I cannot marry you while your mother regards me.
Step into the world of timeless elegance with Mrs. Spring Fragrance, a captivating audiobook by Edith Eaton, read by Man Ling.
Because the green leaf still clings to the bough.
Experience the lively yet complex lives in Chinese American communities at the turn of the 20th century as Edith Eaton's delicate prose weaves together themes of tradition, change, love, and identity.
Forget all that belongs to the joy of life.
Follow the journey of Mrs. Spring Fragrance and witness the struggles and fights of those living on a rapidly changing exotic land while holding on to their cultural traditions, or more importantly, to their identities.
He could hardly believe that his daughter was seriously opposed to becoming the wife of such a good-looking, prosperous young merchant as Wang Ling.
Join Books and Beyond for Mrs. Spring Fragrance. Let the stories come to life in your imagination. Subscribe to Books and Beyond for free on your favorite podcast platforms, or log on to radio.cgtn.com for more.
Welcome back to the Chat Lounge. We continue our chat on whether the United States can regain its dominance in chip making. William, you expect TSMC to go international, but there's a bigger question. Does Washington want it to happen? Because TSMC opening fabs across the world may be something that the U.S. government doesn't desire, right? It intends to encircle TSMC on U.S. soil.
Is for national security reasons to limit the availability of the advanced technologies. But as I said, the market for chips goes beyond the most advanced technologies. And I think TSMC will be going around the world to whatever the markets are appropriate and produce whatever is appropriate for those markets. And they will find that their management style is not well suited for that as of today. And Mo Chang has acknowledged that in many interviews, that they themselves will have to be more introspective and change their own culture in order to become a global company. But the United States, I mean, it's a private company. What it can and cannot do is something that they have to decide. Now, the United States will put enormous amount of incentives for them not to do certain things. And let's remember, a lot of the technology TSMC uses is licensed from American companies. And so if the U.S. policy for national security reasons puts restrictions on where those licenses can be applied, then that will be the case that another management challenge that TSMC will have to get around. Nvidia, by the way, has gotten around those challenges, right? The U.S. government has told Nvidia, you cannot sell the most advanced chips to China. And so they said, okay, we'll produce a different kind of chip.
Right,
they got around it.
Some people say if TSMC could have other choice, they wouldn't, open a fab in the U.S. in the first place.
Well, to you, that's like saying, I want to be rich and famous and thin and rich at the same time. And, I am overweight and I'm not rich. So, I mean, I want a lot of things, but there are realities of the world you have to be constrained by.
All right. And Dr. Chu, what's your take there? How it would affect or determine TSMC's fate, impact on itself?
TSMC's fate are determined not by itself, but by the major players. TSMC, but nothing but little stooge. Well, a smart one, but he didn't own his own fate. His fate is in the hand of America as well as in China. One is the largest controller, another is the largest, buyer or client. I think both sides, American and China, will affect TSMC from two sides. Number one, if China and America cooperate with each other, TSMC will have no doubt to grow very, very fast, like in the past 20 or 40 years. So this industry will become good, very good for production and very good, purchasing happening together. But on the other hand, when America is saying, okay, we're going to block China's access towards the smart devices, block China's access towards this chip making capacity. And here are only one result left. That is China will rise up, from the largest chip buyer to the largest, chip maker. That's a sure path. Never doubt that. Right now, China has already found lots of technology, equipment, and talents itself to nurture its own chip industry. Well, you probably will feel amazed that like 5 years ago, I think in 2018, when we just smelled the kind of the smell that China is probably going to face some difficulties getting access to chips. And Americans probably going to strong arm China in that perspective. China will have one voice. In China, we have one voice. I say we're doomed. We have no capacity. We have no lithography machine. We have, blah, 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 all kinds of difficulties. But now when you come to China, just welcome to China. Well, it's visa-free anyway. Come, and you will feel it's okay. We are doing okay, even though we cannot produce like 4 nanometer or 2 nanometer, but 14 nanometer, even 7 nanometer, no problem anymore. We can totally do it ourselves. So which means even though China has been cut it out, still China can survive and survive pretty well. So I think the survival issue has already been resolved because China's own capacity for chip making and everything has already been there. The only problem is that how can we catch up with the gap? How can we catch up, with the latest and the best, top-notch quality and technology in chip making? So here is the only problem facing Chinese chip makers right now. And I think if the confrontation and tension continues, I think they are the good days, for TSMC, for Nvidia even, for some other countries, for Qualcomm, for Texas Devices, and all these good days are numbered. But of course, personally, I'm proud to say that, but I don't think that this is the best idea we can have as a whole human being community, because that means every nation will have to spend their own extra money to build the same type of devices again.
That's
to
quite idealistic.
Maintain safety. Yeah, it's not efficient, but we have to do so. So I think let's drop all these tensions. Let's still come, to each other and shake hands and work with each other like before. That's still the best solution we can find.
Well, that's what you wish for. But back to the reality, back to U.S. campaign to regain its dominance in chip making. While reshoring chip production back to the U.S., Washington is also stepping up its containment of potential rivals, right? Shortly after the U.S. Commerce Secretary announced TSMC's mass production in the States, the Biden administration issued sweeping rules governing U.S. chip exports, and more than 100 other countries would face different quotas on the amount of AI chips they could receive from U.S. companies. So, Dr. Li, can you help us understand how this quota system may work?
So the way I understand it to work is that the U.S. basically have categorized countries into different tiers and put basically specific limits on the number of AI chips they can import from American firms. Very close allies, basically those on the top tier, like Canada or like Germany, can have unrestricted access to the AI chips, while other countries have to face caps on the total number of these advanced GPUs that they can import. I think the default number for many nations is around 50,000 advanced GPUs per year. And depending on the relationship to Washington, you can apply to increase number of GPUs to purchase. And for countries in the bottom tier, basically you're completely banned from the chips. So I think that Washington's primary goal here is, of course, to prevent adversaries like China from acquiring these cutting-edge AI technologies and from acquiring these GPUs to train AI models. And by controlling the flow of these chips, the U.S., of course, want to maintain its technological advantage and also for national security concerns. But I think overall, it's very costly to implement such a quota system. First of all, it's restricted countries. They could turn to other suppliers. For example, they could turn to countries in the first tier and buy from them. It's very difficult to track and to monitor. Basically, these transfers are not happening between different countries in an unauthorized way. It's very costly. And also, I think these quota system also requires a very close understanding of the demand of each country. So basically, different countries, they have different sizes and different markets. So putting the same cap on different countries just by their proximity to Washington in terms of a political spectrum is a very foolish practice from a market perspective. So overall, I don't think it can quite get what it wants. But importantly, there's like a 120-day comment period. So basically, I think the ball is tossed to the Trump administration, and the final call is for the new administration to make.
Indeed, it's not just costly, and it also could, rankle some foreign governments, right? We see even countries that are close trading partners or military allies of the U.S., like Mexico or Switzerland, Poland, or Israel, will face restrictions on their ability to purchase larger amounts of American AI products. So, William, obviously, we've seen the EU Commission has voiced its concern about the U.S. measure. So how do you expect those companies in those countries to be affected, and how may they react then?
Well, as an economist who always favors the use of market forces, this is something that really interferes with market forces to be able to redirect the flow of chips that are allowed to be exported and to put quotas on different countries. And as Dr. Lee said, it's very difficult to ultimately put quotas on these things because you don't buy just the chip. You generally buy the thing that chip is contained in. And those machines tend to be very, very complicated and full of very different components. And to just say that, well, if you have a market that has a high demand for advanced AI chips, you have to limit the number of sales of those machines. It's going to be very hard to enforce. My own view is that it's really an attempt by the Biden administration to show yet again in its waning days that it knows the problems that the United States faces. It recognizes there's a huge amount of competition out there. And it's the last-ditch effort to say that the Biden administration made the crowning achievement in limiting and protecting American producers. I think it's a fallacy myself. I don't think it is going to work out the way President Biden thinks it will work out because of the distortions it introduces. But the thing that I think President Trump is going to have to wrangle with is how to ensure kind of a regionalization of trade, to be able to produce in different locations for different markets. And for the North American market and those of our close allies, President Trump will also try to assure the security and robustness of the supply chains of vital stuff, including advanced chips, to these countries and companies that are operating within these countries. And in the way he normally operates, he says, look, if you're our friend, I'm going to go out of my way to help you. If you're not our friend, I'm going to go out of my way to make life difficult for you. So I think, he will probably adapt and change this quota system in a way that achieves that ultimate goal of getting more people to be friendly with the United States. Otherwise, they will find their life more difficult.
Right. Not only those countries, but also industry players like inside the U.S., like you mentioned, Nvidia and Oracle have voiced opposition. And William, Nvidia warned that 80% of the GPU or graphics processing unit market may evaporate if the policy is enacted. But as an economist, would the damage be that big, or 80% of the GPU market would be gone for American?
I think it shows that Jensen Huang is being a good CEO, trying to protect this market. If I were him, I'd be making outrageous claims also about, oh my God, this policy is going to be so damaging to my company, which is so important to you. Ease off. I think these kind of projections are more rhetoric than they are reality. The reality they do represent is that it will make his life much more difficult to try to find some way to allocate and distribute his product in a way that conforms with whatever restrictions these quotas are supposed to represent, and at the same time, keep their customers happy. He's very good at keeping customers happy, as every good CEO is. As I said before, when he was restricted from selling his bestseller to China, he came up with another product that could be sold to China. So it is a management challenge. It's yet another management challenge. And it's unfortunate that so many challenges are being produced in order to secure supply chains and to secure the safety and soundness of national security. These things have generally not been taught in economics classes, that efficiency is sort of the way the markets work, and the markets produce the most efficient solution. And I think COVID has taught us that efficiency is not the only objective of policy, and security and soundness and safety and reliability are things that are important aspects to try to get goals to try to achieve. And the markets are not very good at doing that. And right now you're finding governments around the world struggling with ways of trying to get more national security and more robust supply chains and satisfy their workers with high salaries. Those are the policy objectives that every government is facing. The United States is one of them.
Yeah, like you said, efficiency is not the only objective, but some people are saying that those companies are just concerned more about their short-term sales, and that may affect their share prices, like you just mentioned. Or do you think they really think the new rules will only have a counterproductive effect on the development of the U.S. chip industry?
Well, for example, a slightly different area, the Green New Deal, right, says no more internal combustion engines by 2030. That imposes enormous costs on a lot of companies like General Motors and traditional car makers.
Right.
But if that legislation were to stay in place, then they're going to have to conform with it regardless. And they would have to learn to produce electric vehicles. Just like the same thing with the chips. If you have a weird law that imposes restrictions on you, you're going to have to change to adapt the law or go out of business.
The Chat Lounge. The Chat Lounge unpacks views and opinions on hot issues in a more casual way.
Then you're saying that the opposition from the industry will not change the mind of American decision makers.
Oh, I'm not saying that at all. In fact, I think President Biden probably would not change his mind because he's got a clear set of values he wants to have in his administration, like the Green Deal and these quotas, the use of these quotas. President Trump is much more practical and pragmatic. If you say that, look, there's a better way to achieve your objective of securing a high income for American workers and securing our supply chains, he's going to listen. And I think you'll see this policy being adapted, very seriously adapted as time goes on and the Silicon Valley CEOs bring the reality of the world in front of President Trump.
All right, then, to the question of how would this policy affect the rest of the world? I think Dr. Jiaos already mentioned that China will survive pretty well. But Dr. Li, what's your expectation then?
So I think what the U.S. companies like Nvidia worry the most about is the consumers in China lost the dependence on U.S. technologies. So this Biden administration policy exactly kind of facilitates that, meaning that if you can't purchase the chip from the American manufacturer, then why not turn to other manufacturers and suppliers, for example, a Chinese one. So China has also been a major consumer of AI technologies and also a major developer of AI-based applications. For example, the robotics, humanoid robots and so on. So the demand is there. The question is who to purchase from, right? So I think the overall impact on the chip production and other sectors for China is, if this policy is implemented, I think the impact will be in the short term negative, but in the long term very positive, because Chinese manufacturers are going to find innovative ways and cost efficient ways to achieve the same goal in an engineering sense, but with fewer cost. So I think Chinese companies will also, come up with solutions both in hardware and software to kind of come to meet up these requirements from the consumers, and also accelerate the R&D sector and also the chip making sector to make sure its own semiconductors industry in China is developed and improved in the near future. So I totally agree with William and Professor Chu that I think this policy overall is a very damaging policy to the global AI chip making industry. But if we're talking about Chinese chip makers, I think maybe there's a little advantage, a silver lining.
Yeah, I want to echo exactly what Dr. Lee said. If I were sitting in China right now, I'd be cheering this policy. I'd be saying, wow, this is the best thing since sliced bread. This will be the greatest subsidy the Chinese chip making industry ever got from the United States. So for China, this is a great thing.
Right. But to the global chip industry, then, how would this reshape, the whole landscape? Maybe William?
Yeah, I think what it does, it incentivizes companies to move away from reliance on American technology licensing and developing other technologies that they control. President Xi's Made in China 2025 policy that was put in place 10 years ago was to be at the frontier of those industries that don't have standards that are set by the United States. And so you saw China become incredibly prominent in electric vehicles, solar panels, and a lot of the pharmaceuticals and AI and quantum computing. So I think a national policy to try to develop this industry is something that you can put in place, and with enough capital investment, there's no question in my mind you can come up with technologies that don't require licensing of U.S. technologies. So I think the global landscape will be one where if it's important enough for you as a country to develop your own chip making capacity, and the restrictions of using U.S. licensing is a constraint, if you're willing to pay the price and your citizens are willing to pay the price, you can always get around it. The question is, how much are you willing to pay to develop your own technology? Is it cost effective to do so? Or can you find a simpler chip and just using more of a simpler chip to get around the restriction of not having the most advanced chip? And that is a management engineering problem, which I think every good engineer is, willing to take on, because they're saying, if I can't do this, I know as a good engineer, I'll find a better way to do this. I speak as a former engineer who's gone many years in engineering school, where that is exactly what's taught. A good engineer will always find their way around whatever obstacles are in front of them. And like I said, these kind of restrictions that the Biden administration has put on use of American technology and that export quota kind of thing is the best shot in the arm for development of alternative technologies around the world.
Right. And Dr. Chu, would you draw us a different picture?
Different picture of what? Of Nvidia? I mean,
of the whole industry.
The whole industry. Come on. We are in a big, what we call the turning point moment. A globalization, well, like Willem just mentioned, like TSMC, actually is ISMC. Well, chip making is actually a very internationalized and globalization industry. It happens in a globalized world with this backdrop. So that can grow that fast. Not only the supply chain, not only, the capacities, from the ground zero, like research and development, and also the supply chain, and then to the market for the sales. They're all globalized. If there's no globalization, globalized market, globalized the talents, globalized supply chain and everything, you wouldn't have this industry in the first place. But now it's been changing. This is not nuclear power. Nuclear power and nuclear bomb are actually been happening in a very isolated world. Everybody tried to develop their own nuclear bomb by themselves, even a satellite, but not the chips. The chips need to work everywhere. It's because simple as that. It's because internet need to work everywhere. There is no something called the Japanese internet or Korean internet or Chinese internet, American internet. Internet is everywhere, which means all the machines need to talk to each other. Therefore, the chips need to talk to each other. And that's how the situation is. Now we have to face the one possibility, and this is what we call the die-touch moment. That is, everybody need to do it for their own. China right now have many of their own ecologies. We've been seeing that because Americans' strong arm and restrictions, we cannot get access to the 8100 GPU, and we cannot use the CUDA ecology accompanied with that. And we cannot use many of this, large language model. You see, alongside with this restriction, there's not only the access towards the hardware, but also the software. For example, the weights on the models cannot be transferred to some other countries, which means China cannot set up a company invested in a third party, for example, in Singapore, like in Vietnam, and then train their model and ship back all the data back to China. That is not allowed. If Vietnam or Singapore are doing that, probably they cannot the certificate to get access to Nvidia GPUs by themselves. So everything has been controlled right now. And the result is China has to depend on their own. And now we'll be seeing Huawei are doing pretty well in the hardware as well as in software. And China are migrating from the CUDA ecology to the PyTorch ecology. And also we have the Mind Spore project by Huawei, we have Mind Studio, and we have, ZTE, we have all the Chinese chipmakers working together. So this ecology has been forming based on a totally brand new ecology. So in the future, we probably will need a new protocol for different countries, a large language model for different countries, machines or chips to talk to each other. That is very, very low efficient, but maybe in the future it is a must. that is not a very good thing. I still remembered when the Crusade tried to fight against, the Islamic countries. So the whole world has been divided by this religious war, and then Soviet in the Western camp are divided by the Iron Curtain. Now we're facing the chip curtain. The chip curtain is real, and it's going to be very dangerous. It's going to have a long tail effect impacting human beings for the next 10 to 20 years to start with, and God knows how many other impact we're going to see in the future.
If there is no such a clear picture of the whole industry, maybe we can ask one question, which is our ultimate question here. Can the United States regain its dominance in the near future? A few years ago, actually before enacting the CHIPS and Science Act, the Biden administration set a goal of the U.S. producing 20% of the world's leading-edge logic chips by 2030. And U.S. chip manufacturing actually accounted for 37% of the global output in 1990. It now constitutes 12% of the global supply. So I'm going to ask each of you, is this goal of rising to 20% in 5 years achievable? Should I start with Dr. Li, please?
Well, I think it's very ambitious. And more importantly, I think the definition of what the leading edge logic chips are going to probably change by 2030, and also the relevance. Will it still be relevant to produce 20% of the leading edge logic chips? Does it even matter by 2030? I don't know. But even by the sentence itself, I think it's very ambitious.
Right. And Dr. Chu?
Well, I think it is very hard to say. Yes, I agree with Dr. Li. That is very, very different world by 2030. All the definition, all the scenario, all the vision is going to change. So I don't think 20% or even 30% or 15% even matters. We're going to see a very different world by then. And just to get prepared, I think in China, we have a word that is try to cross the river by filling the stones. That is, the whole world is need to do so in the next 5 or 10 years. Get very smart, get very much prepared, and to see what changes is coming upon us, and then change and get used to it. That's it.
Fair enough. And last but not least, William, please.
Well, the United States has seen a lot of changes in its industrial structure, especially post-World War II. It used to be the largest steel maker, largest car manufacturer, the largest of a lot of things. And I think what this intention is that the United States remains a significant production force in the high-tech sector going forward. And that's an admirable objective, because I think unlike steel and car making, technology is the way of the future. And the United States is saying we want to be part of the future, not only part of the future as a consumer, but we're going to be producing at least a significant share, 20, 30, 40% of the newest technologies that come to influence our lives in the future. And that's a policy objective of the United States, which is, I think, an admirable one and certainly achievable. And it's probably the same policy objective that every other major economy in the world wants to be. China has already expressed the same policy, as I said, in Made in China 2025, and the Europeans are also coming up with similar type statements. So essentially, all of the major economies of the world say we don't want to be relegated to the backwaters and made irrelevant in terms of future technologies. So every country will be wanting to be a major player in the production of future technologies that influence how the future will be unraveling.
And with that, we wrap up this session of the Chat Lounge. Many thanks to William Li, Chief Economist with the U.S.-based Milken Institute, Dr. Qiang, Fellow of the Belt and Road Research Center at Minzu University of China, and Dr. Li Lun, Assistant Professor of Economics at Peking University, for sharing your insights. The show is available on all major podcast platforms. Please email us your comments at radio@cgtn.com. I'm Tuyun. Thank you for listening. We'll have more chat at the Chat Lounge in a week.
Sideline Story brings you all things sports related. The hottest topics, latest events, juiciest stories, all with a very personal take. Subscribe to Sideline Story Podcast for heated sports discussions covering events that are happening in China and around the world.
Dive into news like never before with Deep Dive, the podcast from CGTN Radio. Join our global reporters for captivating stories and thought-provoking conversations. Search Deep Dive on your favorite podcast platforms and get ready to dive in.